At exactly midnight, while Britain slept and the corridors of the palace remained silent, King Charles signed an order that would permanently change Meghan's place in royal history. There was no ceremony, no warning from the palace gates, and no final round of negotiation. With one controlled movement of the pen, the king directed every royal department to stop using Meghan's remaining official styles in future records. The decision closed a chapter the crown had struggled to define for years. Charles did not rise after signing. Across the desk, a constitutional advisor waited beside the sealed document. Neither man spoke. The order was clear, immediate, and designed to leave no room for appeal. Before we examine why the king made this decision and what it would cost the family, subscribe so you do not miss the next royal update. Charles read the final paragraph twice. The second reading did not make it easier. His hand remained beside the paper as the hesitation disappeared from his face and was replaced by a resolve that had taken years to form. The order did more than change palace language. It ended the uncertain space between private family connections and public royal privilege. The king understood that Meghan would lose the final symbols linking her to official royal life. But he also knew the deeper wound would fall on Harry. His younger son would hear the decision as a punishment against his wife, even if Charles intended it as a permanent institutional boundary. The crown had gained clarity. A father was about to lose what little trust remained between him and his son. The midnight timing had been chosen carefully. Palace teams could update records before competing narratives took control of the story. A second instruction beneath the decree ordered a review of ceremonial privileges still connected to the Sussex household. Future invitations, official listings, and appearances could now be reconsidered individually. Outside the room, an aide received a coded confirmation. He read the message, tightened his grip on the phone, and called Prince William. The future king answered almost immediately. William listened as the terms were read exactly as Charles had approved them. Then he made the call he had hoped never to make. Harry stood with the phone pressed against his ear, while his brother explained that Meghan's remaining royal styling would disappear from official palace use. There would be no gradual transition, no temporary suspension, no private interpretation of what the decision meant. When the call ended, Meghan watched Harry lower the phone. She did not interrupt. She waited until he finally said it. Meghan looked away. Her silence appeared more dangerous than anger. The titles no longer gave her an active position inside the monarchy, but they still carried history, status, and a permanent connection to the life she had once entered. Removing them meant the palace was not simply changing words. It was redefining belonging. Charles had previously considered softer options. One proposal would have restricted when the titles could be used. Another would have left them inactive without formally removing them. He rejected both. In his view, uncertainty had allowed every disagreement to return in a new form. William supported a clean separation because future royal authority could not depend on personal exceptions. But he warned Charles that Harry would see the action as deliberate humiliation. Camilla asked the king a more painful question. Was he prepared to lose his son completely? Charles admitted that the decision might destroy whatever remained of their relationship. But something had happened at a recent family ceremony that changed his position. For months, the palace had tolerated interviews, disputed claims, and public challenges. None of those moments produced the midnight order. The true turning point came during a private memorial at St. George's Chapel. The service had been intended to unite the family. Instead, one confrontation exposed a division that could no longer be hidden. After the ceremony, Meghan challenged a senior palace official about being excluded from the formal family procession. The order of a royal procession carried meaning. Position reflected rank, responsibility, and current service. Meghan argued that her historical title gave her a permanent place in royal ceremonial life, even though she was no longer a working royal. Princess Anne heard the exchange. She stepped closer and calmly reminded Meghan that no title could overrule the sovereign's instructions. Meghan replied that history could not be rewritten simply because the palace found her presence uncomfortable. Anne held her gaze. She warned that using royal status as leverage would force Charles to settle the matter permanently. The following day, Meghan sent a written request demanding formal recognition at future state family events. The document argued that her historical position could not be reduced by internal preference. Charles read it alone. One sentence claimed that the palace had no authority to erase her royal standing. The king underlined the line and ordered a complete constitutional review. The review found one narrow route: a coordinated royal directive could end official use of Meghan's remaining styles and require every palace department to update its records. The legal conclusion removed the final uncertainty, but before Charles signed anything, he summoned Harry to Windsor. It would be their final private confrontation. No advisors entered the room. No secretary recorded their words. Father and son sat across from one another with a folder between them, carrying the authority of the crown. Harry believed there was still time to negotiate. Charles had already studied every available option. The king pushed the folder across the table. Neither man touched it. Charles explained that Meghan's titles could no longer exist separately from the responsibilities attached to royal status. Those responsibilities included limits on commercial influence, public conduct, and any suggestion that private decisions carried official royal approval. If status remains without duty, Charles said, the authority of the crown can be borrowed without accepting its rules. Harry's chair moved sharply against the floor. He accused his father of turning a family conflict into public punishment. He warned that the decision would humiliate Meghan before the world. She had already surrendered security, position, and trust, he argued. Why did the palace still need one final symbol from her? Charles did not match his anger. He answered that the monarchy could not permit royal identity to be used only when it offered influence, protection, or access. Harry leaned forward. Is this really about Meghan? He asked. Or are you punishing me for leaving? Charles admitted that Harry's departure had changed everything, but not in the way his son believed. He opened the folder and offered one final alternative. Meghan could surrender the styles voluntarily before the decree was issued. The public statement would then describe the decision as mutual rather than imposed. Harry rejected the proposal immediately. He called it forced surrender disguised as dignity. Charles removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He told Harry that refusal left him with no other option. The words sounded less like victory than defeat. Harry stood and walked toward the locked door. Before leaving, he turned back. Are you truly willing to choose the crown over your own child? Charles did not answer, but the decision did not belong to him alone. William had argued for clarity. Anne had demanded consistent rules. Senior advisors had studied every consequence before the order reached the king's desk. At the center of it all remained a tired father, being told that hesitation had become more dangerous than action. William believed the issue reached beyond Meghan. If Charles left the question unresolved, every future monarch would inherit the same conflict. A non-working royal was a family member without official duties, yet royal styles could still suggest service, authority, and a continuing role inside the institution. William feared that mixing those two positions would weaken the crown's credibility. Anne placed a marked briefing paper before Charles. She had highlighted sections concerning ceremonial access, public representation, and title usage. Rules lose meaning when personal pressure can bend them, she said. She also told him that protecting Harry from consequences had only extended the crisis. Charles lowered his eyes. William, however, refused to let the decree erase family history. He requested a safeguard making clear that the order concerned official recognition, not Meghan's marriage, motherhood, or place in private family records. The crown could close an institutional door without pretending Harry's wife and children had never belonged to the wider family. A private clause preserved that distinction. It maintained the Sussex family's personal connection to the monarch. While ending any claim that they officially represented him, the clause would not appear in the first public announcement, but it gave Charles a small measure of comfort. Camilla watched him approve the final wording. His hand paused when Harry's name appeared in the explanatory notes. She quietly reminded him that the document concerned policy, but the name belonged to his son. Palace teams were already prepared. Website entries, diplomatic instructions, and ceremonial records waited under strict embargo. At midnight, the decree became active. By dawn, official pages had changed. Formal lists were revised. Diplomatic offices had received new guidance. A decision, signed in silence, was now spreading through records far beyond palace walls. Meghan did not learn through a direct call from Charles. An assistant opened the royal website and saw that the familiar styling had disappeared. Meghan asked to see every altered line. Palace staff had replaced her formal styling with her personal name across official references. Rules governing invitations, correspondence, and ceremonial records were changed at once. Her former status would no longer appear beside state occasions or palace notices. She read the revised entry slowly and stopped where the title had once appeared. Then she closed the screen. "Did you know the exact timing?" she asked Harry. Her voice carried more pain than accusation. Harry admitted that he knew action was close, but he did not believe Charles would complete it without another conversation. He had not expected the changes to appear before they received direct notice. Meghan asked who had been informed first. When Harry said William had received confirmation before them, her restraint hardened into betrayal. She removed a folder of old royal correspondence from a cabinet and placed it beside the laptop. Inside were invitations, private notes, and formal acknowledgments from a life the palace was now redefining. Meghan considered releasing an immediate statement accusing the crown of calculated cruelty. Harry urged her to wait. They still did not understand the full effect of the decree, and one angry sentence could close every remaining path. Then the assistant found something unexpected. One invitation had survived. Charles was offering Meghan a private conversation with no advisors and no public record. She stared at the invitation longer than she had stared at the missing title. The choice before her was no longer simply whether to fight. It was whether she wanted revenge or closure. The call was arranged through a protected connection. Harry, William, palace advisors, and communication staff were excluded. Charles wanted no institutional shield between them. He did not address Meghan as a duchess. She did not call him Your Majesty. Without ceremony, they faced each other as two people whose decisions had divided the same family. Charles spoke first. He said the order was not intended to erase her marriage, motherhood, or role in Harry's life. It ended official recognition, not personal history. The crown could define public authority, he explained, but it could not rewrite the family that existed beyond palace walls. Meghan did not soften. She replied that removing the titles before, the world still told millions of people that the palace considered her unworthy of belonging. The legal language might separate status from family. The public would hear rejection in both. Charles listened without interrupting. Then he admitted something he had avoided saying for years. The monarchy had failed to resolve the conflict, before distrust hardened into resentment on both sides. Silence followed. Meghan then made the decision he had not expected. She would not launch a legal challenge. She would not spend the rest of her life fighting for recognition from an institution she had already left. She insisted the choice was not surrender. It was an end to the cycle. Charles exhaled slowly. Relief entered his voice, but regret remained. Meghan said she would accept the removal, but she would never apologize for protecting her independence or choosing a life beyond royal control. She had one condition. Archie and Lilibet must never be publicly blamed for decisions made by their parents. Charles answered without hesitation. Their family connection would be protected, and the constitutional decision would not be used against the children. When the call ended, Meghan found Harry waiting nearby. She looked at him for several seconds. "It is over," she said. There was no triumph in the words. There was no defeat, only exhausted acceptance. With Meghan choosing not to challenge the order, the palace prepared to release the decision publicly. By sunrise, the midnight decree had become a national argument. Broadcasters interrupted their schedules. Royal correspondents gathered outside Buckingham Palace under grey skies. Supporters called the order overdue. Critics described it as unnecessarily severe. One newspaper headline captured the moment: "The Crown closes the door." The palace issued a short statement confirming that Meghan's remaining official styles had been removed by order of the sovereign. The wording drew one careful boundary. Private family relationships would continue. Formal constitutional standing had ended. The language was restrained. The consequences were not. A crowd gathered outside the palace as the news traveled across the world. For supporters and critics alike, the meaning was clear. A door had closed and no one expected it to reopen. A former household official summarized the decision in a television interview. "The family connection survives," he said. "The royal role does not." Harry watched the coverage in silence. Meghan lowered the television volume when commentators began debating whether she had been defeated. She reminded Harry that they had already chosen not to fight. He nodded, but acceptance had not removed the wound. William learned that the public reaction was more divided than expected. He had wanted clarity, yet he now understood that clarity could still produce anger. He instructed palace staff to avoid triumphant language. Charles refused to watch the continuous coverage. Instead, he entered a private chapel alone. When he returned, a message from Harry was waiting. Meghan would not challenge the order. The Crown's decision was secure. But there was no true winner. Charles had protected the boundary he believed the monarchy required. The price was greater distance from his son. Meghan had lost the final formal symbols of royal belonging. But she had also stepped away from a conflict that had defined her for years. Harry could not reverse the decision, yet he no longer had to wait for another threat from the palace. The titles were gone. The battle surrounding them had finally ended. Charles returned to the office where he had signed the decree. The change was now permanent across ceremonial records, official correspondence, diplomatic protocol, and future royal documents. Meghan remained Harry's wife and the mother of the king's grandchildren, but she no longer held an active or symbolic role connected to the crown. Charles placed the signing pen inside a drawer. He did not preserve it as a trophy. There was no pride in the gesture, only finality. Then he read Harry's message again and understood the true cost of what he had gained. The monarchy had achieved clarity. The father had gained distance. Across the ocean, Meghan closed the folder of old royal correspondence. She destroyed nothing. Every invitation, note, and acknowledgement remained inside. Then she stored the folder away. The act carried its own meaning. She was not denying the past, but she would no longer use it to argue for a future inside the palace. Harry accepted that his family would now live entirely beyond the formal structure into which he had been born. He could mourn that separation, but he could no longer pretend restoration was one conversation away. William saw the decree as a rule for the future. Royal status could not remain suspended forever between private freedom and institutional privilege. Even so, he recognized the pain hidden beneath the success. Anne found Charles before dawn. She told him the decision had been necessary, but necessity, she reminded him, did not remove grief. Charles quietly agreed. The final positions were now clear. The monarchy had chosen definition over uncertainty. Meghan had chosen independence over continued recognition. Harry had chosen his immediate family over a return to royal life. The decree did not erase blood ties or memory. It permanently separated personal family identity from official royal authority. Charles had finally stopped postponing the unavoidable. Meghan had stopped seeking recognition from a system she no longer trusted. And Harry had accepted that the life he chose outside the palace could not remain permanently connected to the privileges he left behind. The signed order remained on the desk as dawn entered the palace windows. It was effective, irreversible, complete. By sunrise, the crown had drawn its final boundary. Meghan had accepted a future beyond that boundary. Charles had preserved the institution, but lost another piece of his relationship with his son. William had secured a rule he believed future reigns would need, and a conflict that had haunted the family for years had finally reached its conclusion. There was no public victory, No celebration inside the palace, only a decision, a separation, and the silence that follows when every side understands that the argument is over. The Midnight Order had begun as an act of royal authority. It ended as something far more personal. A father accepting distance, a son choosing his wife, and a woman deciding that independence mattered more than a title she could no longer use. Thank you for watching. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for the next fictional royal story.